Cap, Mann, Gaviota, Mr. Gam, and Ventura Boulevard.
For the plaintiff, I will be Mr. Gam.
For defense attorney number 1, I am Ms. Bohr.
Defense attorney number 2, Mr. Ditchter.
And I'll be the witness. And I will start with a statement. Ready? No estimation in feet, no.
And you say a couple car lengths. What type of car are you referring to?
A large car.
Can you give an example of what type of car you would be using as your example?
One that could carry like 6 passengers.
When you use the example of car length, couple of car lengths, are you referring to a car about the length of your car?
No, larger.
Do you have an estimate as to the length of your car?
I don't think in terms of that car. Perhaps 3 in terms of my car.
In your best estimate and recollection, were there more than 10 feet from the front of your car to the rear end of the man car at the moment you first saw the brake light on the man car?
I'm sorry, I don't have a conception of feet.
At the moment you first saw the brake light on the man car, would you have any estimate or recollection if there were more than 40 feet from the front end of your car to the rear end of the man car?
Again, I have to say I'm sorry. I cannot conceptualize feet.
How much time was there between the time you first saw the brake light on the man car and the moment you first began to apply your brakes?
To the best of my recollection, I immediately, upon seeing, struck my brake.
At the moment you first saw the brake light on the man car, was your foot on the accelerator?
Yes, it was on the gas pedal.
Would it be your best estimate that it was less than 1 second from the moment you first saw the brake light on the man car to the moment you first began to apply your brakes?
Yes.
Did you hear the screeching of tires or brakes before the collision occurred?
No.
Other than attempting to apply your brakes, did you do anything else to attempt to avoid the collision?
I looked in my mirror to see if it would be safe to try to steer into another lane to avoid the collision. And there were people there on one side, and there was traffic going the other way on the other side, and it didn't look like it was safe. It looked like the safest thing to do was take the hit the car. I was afraid I would hurt somebody.
Which mirror did you look in?
Rear view.
Did you look in your rear view mirror before you attempted to apply your brake?
No, after I applied my brake.
Did you actually swerve from your course of travel?
No, I told you the choice was not to. Upon looking in the rear view mirror, I chose not to.
Was your vehicle actually repaired?
Yes.
Do you have any estimate as to approximately how far the front end of your car was from the intersection of Gaviota at the moment of impact with the manned vehicle?
It was rather a good distance away. It was far enough away where there was no need to apply the brake at that point to compensate for the light.
Do you have any estimate in terms of car lengths?
Objection, vague as to what time.
At the moment of impact, do you have an estimate as to how many car lengths the front end of your vehicle was from the intersection of Gaviota?
No, not at the moment of the impact.
At the moment the accident occurred, was your car radio on?
No.
Do you have a cassette player playing?
No, I don't have that.
Was your driver's window up or down?
Up.
Within the 5 seconds before the impact, did you hear the sound of a horn honking?
No.
I'm sorry, I do have one more. I thought I was done. I apologize again. At the moment that you became aware Mr. Mann's vehicle had its brake lights illuminated, did you become aware of anything else that you felt was significant concerning Mr. Mann's vehicle?
Objection, vague as to what you mean by she felt anything significant.
I can't recall.
Do you have any facts to support the contention that Mr. Mann's vehicle stopped rapidly and in part contributed to this accident?
I'm sorry, could you
I'll be happy to repeat the question or rephrase it.
rephrase that question, please?
Going back to the answers to interrogatories that Mr. Gam read to you, among the contentions that the answer to interrogatory was the contention that Mr. Mann's vehicle stopped quickly and contributed to the accident. Do you have any facts to support the contention, or are you aware of any facts to support the contention that he did stop suddenly?
Yes, he did stop suddenly.
How do you know?
Because he was driving in front of me for a bit before the accident happened, and he was going a speed that seemed reasonable for the road that we were on, and then suddenly he braked.
Earlier, you told me you weren't sure if the man brake lights came on in front of you while you were watching, or whether you just were aware that the lights were in fact on. Isn't that correct?
I believe that was asked, or what I was recalling at that time was after the moment of impact, that whether, or at the moment of impact, and his brake lights were on at the moment of impact.
Okay, I'm sorry to do this, but now I need to go back and try to reset the stage. I believe I had earlier asked you whether you recalled Mr. Mann's vehicle being in front of you before seeing the brake lights, and I believe you had told me that you had no recollection of that, nor did you have any recollection of what lane you had been in, whether you had made any lane changes prior to the accident. You seemed unclear as to all of that, at least to me. So let's go back. Where was your vehicle in terms of where the accident occurred when you first became aware that Mr. Mann's vehicle was ahead of your vehicle?
I'm sorry, are you asking...
Let me rephrase it.
Yeah, could you please?
Okay. Did you become aware of Mr. Mann's vehicle ahead of your vehicle at any time before you got into Ventura Boulevard?
No.
When you got onto Ventura Boulevard and you entered into the right lane, was Mr. Mann's vehicle ahead of your vehicle?
I don't recall.
You told us within what you believed to be approximately 2 blocks of coming onto Ventura Boulevard that you moved into the number 1 lane or the left lane, correct?
Uh-huh.
Is that correct?
Yes, I'm sorry. I forgot for a moment.
That's okay. At the moment that you moved into the left lane, was the vehicle immediately ahead of your vehicle, Mr. Mann's vehicle?
I don't recall about exactly that time, no.
Was I correct before that you did not recall whether or not between that moment when you got into the left lane and the time of the actual accident, you could not recall whether or not, due to traffic or other conditions, you had made any other lane changes between first getting into the left lane and the time of the accident?
You are correct.
Was I also correct that you were not sure what lane of traffic you were in, actually, at the moment of the impact?
That's correct. However, I do remember that prior to the moment of impact, I was behind Mr. Mann, and we had been traveling for a bit.
Do you recall when it was that you first became aware that Mr. Mann's vehicle was the vehicle ahead of you?
I don't recall.
Do you recall for how long a distance, either in terms of time or in blocks, or in car lengths, or whatever other measure that you feel comfortable with, do you recall Mr. Mann's vehicle being ahead of your vehicle prior to the time of the impact?
Objection, vague and ambiguous.
About 3 car lengths, 4 car lengths.
So 3 or 4 car lengths prior to your seeing the headlights or the brake lights of the man's vehicle come on, you became aware Mr. Mann's vehicle was in fact ahead of you, correct?
Uh-huh.
At the moment you first became... Is that yes?
Yes, that's yes. I'm sorry, yes.
I'm getting coached. At that moment, i.e. the moment you first became aware Mr. Mann's vehicle was ahead of your vehicle, what speed was your vehicle traveling?
Objection, asked and answered.
No, my question to her earlier was what speed her vehicle was going when she saw the brake lights go on. Now we've moved everything back into a new distance. It was not clear before, and I apologize, counsel. I really thought I was done. So now I'm moving back to the point when you were first aware that this vehicle driven by Mr. Mann was ahead of your vehicle. What speed was your vehicle traveling at that moment?
Objection, asked and answered, just for the record. She can answer.
Okay.
Approximately 30.
So your vehicle's speed did not change in time, correct? Between the time you first became aware of Mr. Mann's vehicle ahead of you and that time some car lengths later when you became aware that Mr. Mann's brake lights were on?
When I saw Mr. Mann's brake lights go on, I immediately hit my brake.
Yes, I'm talking about the time...
When my speed changed.
I'm talking about the time between your first becoming aware Mr. Mann's vehicle was ahead of your vehicle and the time you became aware that Mr. Mann's brake lights were in fact on.
If you're being inclusive of the time that Mr. Mann's brake lights are on, I have to be inclusive of that time as well. And during that time that Mr. Mann's brake lights were on, there's a possibility that my speed changed because I hit my brakes.
I appreciate that. We're at cross terms right now, so I'm going to try to clarify. I am breaking this into 2 segments.
Uh-huh.
Segment 1 is you become aware that Mr. Mann's vehicle is ahead of your vehicle,
Uh-huh.
and you're traveling 30 miles an hour.
Uh-huh.
That first segment ends at the moment that you now become aware that Mr. Mann's brake lights are on. Once you become aware his brake lights are on, I understand that you put the brakes on and attempted to stop, and maybe actually did stop somewhat before the impact. I'm willing to acknowledge that.
Okay.
I want to go to the first segment, when you first become aware that Mr. Mann's vehicle is ahead of you, and then, some 3 car lengths later, you become aware his brake lights are on. Before you have attempted to put your brakes on during that period, did your speed change?
No.
Do you have an estimate of what speed Mr. Mann's vehicle was traveling at the moment you first became aware that his vehicle was ahead of your vehicle?
No.
At any